leatherette, warm, leatherette, warm, leatherette. See the breaking glass.
Me what the artwork should be like. I wouldn't have liked that very much as a recording artist. So I'd never wanted to impose that on any of the artists that we work with. And also, I didn't want. I thought I wanted to have I always wanted the label to be in the background, you know, and the artist to be in the foreground. So I think it's much more interesting for the artist to.
Because here is kind of a self-styled, almost electronic pop group, kind of what you wanted, I guess. But these sleeves are anything but pop. They're kind of almost high art, very, very exquisite photography. Vince Clarke said to me a little while back that he couldn't really fathom why you would spend £1,000, I think was the figure he quoted, on wrapping a swan in some cellophane. What was the brief? What did you say to Brian? Or was there even a conversation? Or were you as mystified as anyone when you saw what came back?
There was no conversation. We were introduced to Brian through a mutual friend, and I think we just said, "Well, have a go and see what you come up with," and that's what he came up with. Later on in the relationship with Brian, there was a lot more discussion, of course, when we got to know him better. But I mean, the first sleeve, the swan in the which nobody, including he, has no clue what it means.
I was hoping you'd tell us. But...
No, I mean, I saw him recently, and we were talking about it. He hasn't got a clue.
Some seriously dark stuff going on.
Why don't you try unpacking it for us?
No, I don't mind. You can if you want. But the broken frame sleeve as well, which is a quite an iconic image in its own right. It feels like it's heading into slightly darker territory, which I guess, Anton, let's pick up the Depeche Mode story from where you have had a major influence, I guess, on the direction of the way that they appear, the style, their releases, the videos. If I think back to Songs of Faith and Devotion and the tour around that, everything seemed to be all in sync with one another. The stage design, the videos that went with it, the record sleeves, their imagery. How do you get to that position with a band where you become so integral and so trusted to the way that they want to be?
Yeah, I mean, it was a surprise to me too that we worked towards that, but it was a very organic kind of development. You know, as Daniel probably remember, I first did a photograph of Depeche Mode in '81 for a magazine, The New Enemy, and then I was asked by Mute twice in the next few years to do their press pictures, and I turned them down because I thought they were kind of weedy pop band, you know, and I was really into Echo and the Bunnymen, like more. But then in '86 they asked me to do a video, and the only reason I did it was because the stipulation was it had to be done in America because they were on tour, and you know, it was early days for me with the videos, and I'd never done a video in America, so the only reason I said yes was because of the stipulation. But that's so. You know, it wasn't me really wanting to work with Depeche Mode, and then that was odd to see years later how it became so integrated, you know. And the tour you mentioned, I think I did everything, yeah, the videos and the stage and record sleeve and all that, and even the design of the albums. But the difference between what Brian did, Brian Griffin, and me, I think, is that when I thought of Depeche Mode, I wasn't thinking of so much of an electronic band that was cold. I wanted to have a soulful thing, and I wanted to have a human touch to it. So my photography of my sleeves are very handmade, kind of almost, you know. And I think that's yeah, sort of human touch to it. That was.
I also think you understood their sense of humour as well, which I think was very important.
Yeah, or I pretended at least, and vice versa. But so I think that's how that started, and somehow. You know, although originally I had fought Depeche Mode, their music changed just at the time that I started to meet them again, and I felt that the videos, you know, worked very well with their music. My little ideas I had, and it was also in the days that, you know, you got £15,000 to do a video, £20,000 if I'm not mistaken, early on, the Super 8.
Yeah, I remember.
And nobody really put a lot of pressure on you to come back with this. So it was very free, and I was really able to, I filmed myself. So it became more like my little films, and that was fantastic. And then you got them on MTV, and of course it all went wrong when they became popular. But like with Violator, of course, the videos became very, very popular. Like I Enjoy the Silence, and then there was more pressure on everything. But still relatively, easy. I think Enjoy the Silence. I had that idea, because what I do is I play records, and being a foreigner, I don't really listen much to the lyrics, so I pick up on the obvious bits. And it's much more about the melody or the sound of the tracks. And I always had this feeling of somebody walking on his own with a deck chair, but that didn't go down very well. The first meeting I had with Depeche. They thought they had created the best song ever, and they couldn't see that really going with this idea. So they asked me to rethink. But once you listen to music and you have one idea, it's really difficult to come up with something totally different, at least for a Dutch guy like me. And so I came back to the next meeting with the same idea. And they went, okay, well, just do it then.
Hold them down.
Yeah. And it was great to see that video speak to so many people. And then with Songs of Faith Devotion, and later there was much more pressure from Warner Brothers to bring in another video director. So at some point, the record company were now not another Anton Corbijn video, so it sort of went belly up in that sense.
Just to clarify something, we licensed the Depeche Mode to Warner Brothers in America.
Yeah, sorry, it was Mute Records, but they listened to Warner Brothers. No,
no, we didn't listen to Warner Brothers.
But anyway, that was amazing. But I don't have any of these sleeves here, but I also designed it. And talking about typeface early on, what you did, I know really next to nothing about typeface, so I started to make my own typeface. And that was usually painted, and then I somehow put it on the record sleeve. And that was a very sort of, homemade kind of vibe.
So Paul, as a creative director of Mute, having someone like Anton working so harmoniously with the band, how does that make your job?
Harmoniously by himself.
In his vision.
It's great working with Anton.
After all those years.
Because the band has a trust in him. That's the key point, and as we have over the years, we know that he's going to come up with something that is going to be unlike what you expect. You have a look at something, you listen to a song, you hear what you hear out of it. Anton hears something completely different. He visualises something completely different that you would never have imagined. I mean, where did Walking in My Shoes video come from? That doesn't come into your head when you listen to that song.
That's a very religious upbringing.
And so to have work with a band that then you have somebody that they have complete trust in, that they know they will look good, the photos will look good. Depeche went through a period of doing TV shows where they didn't look great, or didn't think they looked great, it was fashion at the time, whatever. Anton came, gave them an aesthetic, put his stamp with them, that made they didn't have to think about that as much. They didn't have to worry so much about potentially looking like idiots, because they looked great, and there was this great humour going through it that sits really well with their sense of humour, and which is what Anton kind of brings to it. Again, that's kind of there throughout all of the sleeves. Whatever you kind of like, you look at the Depeche stuff and it's dark and it's deep and it's like this kind of this great jokes going through all of them, and it's a beautiful partnership.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes things really easy from a label point of view when someone like Anton's involved.
But maybe at the slightly more complicated end of things, you said at the beginning, or we talked at the beginning about Mute has no aesthetic, or you didn't want an aesthetic, you wanted an artist-led kind of approach, very egalitarian, I guess. but you're the creative director and you've got to kind of work within that. How does it, almost having an aesthetic of no aesthetic, how do you make it work?
Well, it's kind of it's down to getting something that the band that works for the art. We want, with each album, we want it to hang together and to work as a piece, because we've got to sell it. And I think that the philosophy that I have that comes from Daniel, which hopefully he's not going to say is completely wrong, is
Let's find out.
The artist will have an idea and they'll want to do something, and it's our job to then make that work in the world so that they feel comfortable with it, they feel that it expresses their music how they want to, and they feel with it, but we make it work in a commercial sense, if you like. Not so much that it's commercial, but in whatever part of the artistic world it needs to sit in, that we make it work on whatever formats, whatever kind of marketing, whatever kind of platform it needs to go, and it's us. That's where it becomes a real headache. It's true, you know. It's like, okay, that's great. Now our real job is to translate that into the world and make it stretch everywhere without losing the heart that the artist brings.
And I mean, looking through the book, you can see the number of different, quite influential people that have worked over the years with Mute Anton, of course, Adrian Shaughnessy, Joe Dilworth, Me Company, all these different people or artists or designers that you've worked with. How does that process work of finding, selecting, knowing what's going to work?
Well, it's basically just sitting down with the artists and seeing what they want to do, being aware of what's going on, talking to them about who we feel would realise their vision, you know, which photographer, in determining what that photographer's doing at that particular time, trying to get something that is not necessarily happening right there, but someone who's coming and maybe going to bring something to the future with it, because it's hard trying to, because you can look at something, we don't want to be, okay, well we don't want to do this, what this photographer or this designer's done. So the artist, the musician, is always going to bring a take to it that no one else has thought of, that no visual artist has thought of.
Yeah.
So then it's getting that right combination of people to work with it, and that, to be, there's such a wealth of great people out there. It's never been that hard, because the germs of the idea, whether it's the tiniest small kind of part of, you know, a visual that they like, or the whole kind of thing, is kind of there, and it's just finding the right person to work with. And so sort of we're building on blocks all the time of all these different people that we've worked with over the years that help us get there.
Does it help that a lot of the artists that come through, if you look at the backgrounds, people like...
Oh, really? True. So yeah, it's great album. It's called Spirit, and I initially said, well, I'm thinking of like Super 8 film. Go back to our little Super 8 films and flags and boots. You know, maybe I'll film it somewhere. And in the end, I was just in my studio at night and started to do cutout things and used, you know, very grainy background to give it a feeling of film. And I showed it to them, and they were very disappointed because in their mind it had to be film. You know. Then it fortunately grew on them, because I was not going to do a film. But yeah, so there is a reaction, you know, that might also not be immediately positive. But what I was going to say earlier, that it's great to have a label where the head of the label is a creative person. You know, that doesn't happen very often, and I think that's really special at Mute.
Yeah, it means that it is about creativity. Someone described it in a blurb somewhere as an incubator for creativity, which was quite...
Yeah, and that's very far-sighted as well. You know, if you want longevity, you're not going to give yourself strict parameters to work around a particular model, because it becomes stale. And that's what I thought about it. I mean, if you want something to really grow, then visually and creatively, then that's the best way of going about it, as far as I can make out. I was going to say something even more inane than that as well.
I was going to explore the kind of the wider wider aspects of Mute as well. So the wider labels, Nova Mute in particular, and Blast First, which to me feel like they're at kind of two very extreme ends of the label's approach. And it occurred to me, there's a generic Nova Mute sleeve sat in front of Paul down here, which is in itself techno and dance music almost exhibit A. Almost demands an aesthetic in a way, because you're going to be flicking through a rack and you're going to want to find that, because you know that's a mark of quality. So it kind of almost, it doesn't seem to quite fit with the idea of a non-aesthetic aesthetic. But then if I contrast it with Blast First, which feels to me, in some of the stuff from South Penn and other people that have worked on that, a completely anything goes, throw anything at the wall. I guess that's a tribute to having a label that fosters creativity, that you can do both things.
Yeah.
But how do you balance that? Particularly with the Nova Mute stuff, which is very clinical.
Yeah, good question. Well, Nova Mute was primarily, as you say, it was a techno label, but primarily a 12-inch label. We did end up making albums, and all the albums had their own distinctive artwork. And I think, Paul, you have to remind me of that. I think some of the 12 inches had their own artwork as well, or were they all house bags?
No, it was house bags for a few years, and then they all had their individuals.
Yeah. And I think it's part of that, maybe, and it's kind of the thing about techno that I like, one of the things I like is it's very functional, and it's very artistic at the same time. It's got this dual, it has to work on a certain level, otherwise, it has to work on a dance floor, otherwise there's no point in it. But it's also, because it's kind of has kind of quite strict limits musically. To work within those limits, you have to be very creative to be original and do something special, and that's what really appeals to me about it. So I suppose the sleeve a little bit, the house bag a little bit reflects that. And we just relaunched Nova Mute. I don't know if any of you guys know that. The two great 12 inches.
That's really good.
And we're still using the same logo because we thought,
bring it back.
We put it in a slightly different place on the sleeve.
It's a completely different design house bag.
Yeah, sorry, completely different design. But of course, in the digital world, it's different because that music is available on Spotify, Beatport, all those places, and so it's because the quantities of 12 inches that we make is very small. Mm-hmm. It just economically doesn't work to have a separate artwork for each one. But of course, digitally it does work. So if you look at the same releases digitally, then they will have full artwork, which also is reflected on the label of the 12 inch as well.
Okay. I was going to another artist that for you, Anton, that you've worked with is in front of you here. There's the Boatman's Call era from Nick Cave, which is an artist that is to me very dark, but somehow in the imagery that you put together for that album and the singles, somehow made him even darker. Somehow it's all about the shadows. Well done.
I tend to bring the best out in people. Well, I mean, I did a color sleeve for Nick too, for the Henry's Dream. I did, which was a photograph that was painted later and then I made a billboard of. But the Boatman's Call, it was just a very simple shoot we were going to do in the studio, and it didn't work at all. So then I said to Nick, well, there's a nice wall outside, why don't we try outdoors? And he didn't want to, but we did in the end, and we just took a few pictures, and I think I sent Paul the contact sheets and one print, just as an example, and Nick came in and said, that's it, that's the picture, you don't need any more prints. So the one that I selected became the album sleeve. And then the singles were some, I think some pictures I did at his home with the piano or something. But that was dark, it was a dark period. And we had been talking about doing the last album as well, but in the end it became a black sleeve.
Sorry, that's my phone going off.
Do you want to take that?
A new tape?
The new Nova Mute release.
It's available in ringtone only.
So I've got two more questions, and then I think we'll open it up to. It's gone. then we'll flick over to questions from the audience. So this one was the one that I was guided, maybe this might not go down so well. And this was about the fact that, Daniel, you don't do celebrations when it comes to the label. And yet, in its own way, this...
We don't do anniversaries.
Anniversaries, that's right, yeah. We do celebrations.
But we don't do anniversaries.
Not anniversaries.
Yeah.
And yet, the book itself feels like it's got the kind of the weightiness, the sumptuous quality we were talking about earlier, that feels like some sort of anniversary present from the label.
Not really. I mean, the idea of the book, the idea was, happened 3 or 4 years ago. It just coincidentally took a long time to get it all put together, and so it just happens to come out this year, which is not a particular anniversary. So I don't know what you're talking about.
See, you did. So there we go. And the last one before we move on to questions. You mentioned this just a few moments ago when, a number of people, it's probably not the right thing to say in a record store, of course, but people are interacting with music a lot more with digital streaming, where the role of design seems to have shrunk, just like the kind of presence of a label, perhaps, down to this kind of 2 by 2 centimetre square. How important is design now? This ties in with the title of the book, which is 78 to the Future. I suppose I was looking to a future when it comes to music. How much of a role do you think that the great creativity that you bring to the table with the design of these works, how much is that going to still survive in the future?
Well, we still release everything on vinyl, and I think that's where we start from every time, is the vinyl artwork. And then, I mean, before digital, it had to work on a CD, which is obviously a lot smaller. It is important that it works when you have a kind of a page of albums, of sleeves on a computer screen, that the sleeve you do stands out, and I think so. As always, the sleeve always had to stand out in some way, when you're flicking through the record shelves, record racks, it had to somehow stand out. I mean, when I started buying albums, my route into the album was the artwork, because that was the only way you could, unless John Peel, you had it on John Peel, the only other route into the album was the artwork. So that's always had to be, it's always had to work on a kind of a retail level, shall we say.
Yeah.
And that level has changed over the years. I think the artwork is still just as important as it ever was. I think you have to think more about how it's going to work in the context of in the digital platform. And I think with the New Order album we did, that we worked, which was designed by Peter Saville. That was kind of an important part of that as well, and it worked. It did work extremely well on the digital platform. But if you look, you tend to see lots of portrait shots, very straightforward, high-tech, high-glossy portrait shots, one after another. They kind of fade into the background, so you have to have something that sticks out. And
it becomes very bold. There's very little subtle stuff left on record sleeve now, because it's all on that small format. That's a shame.
It's a shame, but it's also it's a shame. It's a shame, but it's also a good limitation. To work within those limits, to make something that's really striking and unusual within those limits is a challenge, I think.
But also not letting that limit you in terms of that's not the only place. So you're designing something that has to work in that area, but then you're doing something that works on the vinyl sleeve, that works on a poster, that works on a CD, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It needs to have that aesthetic for that release, but work in all those different areas, do that job in those different places. When you just have one design that then you blow up or blow down, that's lazy anyway. It doesn't work. It's a discredit to the artist and to the imagery. So it's more. It gives more of a challenge. It's an evolution, and I think if things weren't evolving, if anything in terms of art and music and sleeves and stuff, if those challenges weren't evolving and changing over the course of different years, then we'd find things less interesting and less barriers would be pushed and looked at. What do you think, Steve?
Healthy place to
You're right. I think you're right. No, but I think you're right in terms of thinking about So there's a, like, if you want to talk musically, the kind of tempo and the cadence that you have in the music is now reflected in the very immediate way that we encounter things digitally. And what used to be this incredible way, as well as the music, arresting time and playing with things temporally, now you're not really able to do that by kind of living with it, like the ritual of taking a thing out of the sleeve and putting it on the record player, etc. That's kind of gone. But there is something interesting about that rapidity of imagery, that kind of blip kind of way of anticipating something, and you've got to really work to get your audience. But also you do have these other things, posters and billboards and other ways of just playing with time. I think that's the kind of way that music does it. If art just arrests you and it takes you somewhere else, and it slows things down, takes you out the speed of or the tempo of general activity in life, and that's the job of music and art, isn't it? I don't know exactly where I'm going with that.
Well, I think that's a really, really good place to have gotten to in the conversation.
The Violet Rose is one of the most iconic images there is, and probably one of the most tattooed image on every Depeche Mode fan, including myself. How did that come up? What was the concept or the thought behind it? Just take a great picture and say, oh, that looks great? Or there was something...
We talk about Violator, yeah?
Yeah, the rose on Violet.
Yeah. Well, it's very, primitive thought. I thought violating a rose, like a nice nature thing where you nail it to which I did, I nailed it to a piece of wood. That was the violation, so it was incredibly simple as a thought, and funny enough, we did a different cover for the CD than for the vinyl. We just mentioned that, and I regret it actually, because once an album becomes well known, of course you recognize it also when it's small. So that's the commercial aspect. If something is not very well known, you maybe need to be louder. But if something's well known, you can be more subtle. But yeah, that's the story. I painted the rose red and painted the background black, and that's how I photographed it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question just here in the front row here. Guy in the tie.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I've worked for the occasion. I'm a big fan of documentary evidence, love that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask Daniel about the logo, because it's also so iconic, but it's changed over the years, it's evolved, it's been stylized, it's had the laurel leaves added, it's returned back to its earlier Celso Letraset style. Is there a history that goes with the logo and the changes?
Not really a history. I mean, I suppose I got bored with it after a while, and I think the first variation was that Paul White, Me Company. The first variation was Paul White, and I think I just got bored with it, and well, not bored, but I thought let's try and develop the idea, but not losing. All the logos have had an element of the walking man, however, kind of abstractly. And I just thought it'd be interesting to try other things, but in the end, I just thought, that actually I really like the purity of the original, and. Yeah, I mean that's the history. Really. I mean, I think it was just like let's experiment a bit with it. I think that was the idea, because I wasn't into the idea of a brand consistency or whatever you want to call it, and so it was more fun to play with it at certain times. But I think that at a certain point I thought, no, let's just go back to the original.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
and we played with it some more.
And we played with it slightly more. Yeah, played with it a little bit more.
Simple again. Okay, there was a question just over here before yours, and then we'll come back to you.
I just wanted to make the point that with factory records, it was very similar to the new creative process. It just didn't have as many years to evolve and change. But it was the same thing, putting artists together with people and creative kind of collaborations. So very similar kind of thing.
Yeah, but with factory was more Peter Saville's vision, wasn't it? I think. Not only, no.
At the very beginning with the samplers.
Okay.
But Anton was involved, of course, and lots of other people.
Was it?
Later on.
With videos.
Yeah.
Oh, videos, yeah. Well,
Videos are good.
very late. I think it did 88. I did my first video.
And also
Factory.
Central Station with Happy Mondays. There was all kind of contemporaries and collaborations and artists
Okay.
in the final say too.
Some factory fans in the audience.
Yeah.
I told you I was.
And on the stage as well. A little inappropriate, if you don't mind me saying.
It was either this or a meat
Nice logo.
I didn't want to look like I was
You signed him.
Sorry. Chap down here with the glasses.
Just a quick question, I guess, for Daniel and for Anton. I'm interested in what you think about the state of music today, not the music industry, and Anton, what you think of the state of photography, given that everyone's taking photos, but maybe it's a little bit less considered. So,
Music first.
Music first. The state of music, I mean, that's a very...
I suppose if you were doing the same thing again from the start right now, would you feel optimistic?
I think I'd feel, you know, I don't know. I think if I had the same state of mind, it's difficult, because if I had the same state of mind, I wouldn't feel optimistic or pessimistic, because I would just be doing something that I just really wanted to do. And I wouldn't be thinking about the state of the industry or anything like that, particularly. Although, of course, the way the first single came out was very much a reflection of the state of the industry at the time. Yeah, it's really hard to say, you know, because there's so much. Music is now so fragmented, and there's so much music, and there's so much good music, but still very little exceptional music. I think the idea that the democratization of the making of music has allowed more great things to come up that wouldn't have otherwise come up. That doesn't really answer your question, but...
Is there less personality in the music now? Is it more churned out for the masses? You know?
I think that, I mean, there's always been an element of music where it's been churned out. I mean, you know, I don't know about you, but you know, a lot of people idealise the past and, you know, think of all the great records. But if you actually look at the charts of any period of time since the beginning of pop music, most of it has been kind of churned out for the masses. I think with electronic music, I think there's a danger of lack of originality, because it's just kind of relatively easy to make quite good electronic music now, for very easily on a computer. And when I work with artists, or when I, you know, teach a bit, I really put a lot of emphasis on you know, creating your own sounds and not using sounds that have been made by other people, in order to have your own, you know, create your own signature, you know, your own voice. I mean, with Depeche, just on one, you know, all the people I worked with, especially in the early days, you know, I had some quite strict rules in the studio about what we could and couldn't do in terms of creating sound. I mean, which everybody agreed with. It wasn't really an argument. We never used presets, for instance. You know, now every time you buy a synthesizer or a piece of software, you get 1,000 presets, and you can buy more presets and more presets, which really is kind of, I mean, you can look at that in a certain kind of collage-y kind of way, but if you really want to create your own music, you have to create your own sounds as well. And that's just, you know, and I think that's the same with art, with photography.
That's right. So if we go back to the second part of your question,
Yeah.
which was about the kind of the state of art and photography in general. So, Anton?
Yeah. Phew. I think that you know, I started for a specific reason, taking photographs of musicians. So, and that's not something I would start again today if I grew up now. And I also think that the excitement in photography is not really in the music world. It's much more in fashion. There's some great people working there and much more inventive, unfortunately. So, but yeah, there's great photography being made still, and I know all photographers now, which, I mean, it's a longer discussion, because the downside of it is that photography is not valued anymore much, so it's very hard for a lot of photographers to make a living now. Yeah, but that's a longer conversation. But you know, there's a lot more photography being shown in museums and galleries now than when I grew up, and that's a good thing. You know, there's a lot of beautiful stuff being made, not necessarily in the music world, I would say.
Okay, a question just there.
You all as Blue Mondays, the famously lost model. Was there any concept that you thought was not commercially viable
A sleeve that wasn't commercially viable.
In terms of sleeves, I mean, cool. I mean, we've definitely put out records that are not commercially viable. All of that, which have been great records. I think the thing about Blue Monday was that the more success that was commercially viable in terms of how many it sold, but the more it sold, the more money it lost. I think that was the kind of irony of that release.
That was the sleeve.
Yeah, that was the sleeve. Yeah.
None of those.
Typical for track 3.
Sorry?
None of those in the history of Mute, though.
Not specifically the sleeve.
No.
But in the package.
We did have one where they had to try and make Smell of Grass.
Yeah. And one that opened up like a camera lens that was, yeah. That definitely lost me.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Sorry, I can see.
Working with Simon Granger, I'm a huge Night's Road fan, and they seemed to come to me with an image just packaged already. So what was the kind of to and fro of that relationship?
Well, as you quite rightly said, and I love the Night's Red imagery, and it's perfect for the music. And I mean, Simon Granger was almost kind of part of the band in a sense. He was the part, you know, he was the man who in the band who did the visuals, and we just went with that. I think that was because they worked really well, so there was no reason to tinker with that in any way whatsoever.
Two questions, one for Anton and one for Daniel. Anton, you talked a bit about your creative process, the rose, the deck chair, the boots and the flag. My question is, what influences you? What are your external influences? Which artists do you appreciate? Which other photographers do you admire? And then for Daniel, as an observer, if we refer back to Depeche, two young lads from their teens, grown now into men in their 50s, how their image, the way they present themselves, has changed from wearing Marks and Spencer's fluffy jumpers to now style icons among some people. How much of Anton's influence has been important in that process?
Do you want to answer it first?
Yeah, so I'll answer my bit first. What was it again? Your influences. About my influence. Yeah, well, you know, I can't say I did art college or anything like that, so I came from a family that never went to a museum. So my reference points when I started were music magazines and record covers. And, you know, when I started doing pictures, that was my big dream, to be published or to make a record cover. And so that part of my life has been successful. But the people I liked initially were documentary kind of photographers like Robert Frank, also Diane Arbus and Dorothy Lang. Then when I looked around in people who made photography in the music world, you know, there were people like Jim Marshall, Elliot Landy, David Garr. There were a couple of people that I liked a lot. And of course in England, Michael Cooper I liked a lot too. They were sort of, you know, breaking frontiers, and they made exciting photography, which quite often had a bit of documentary feel in it. And the Elliot Landy picture of the band called The Band, I think that's such a classic photograph. It's so hard to make that better, that concept of 5 guys standing in a row in a field. And believe me, I tried. So that were my photography influences. And you know, these days, I guess there's so much influence that goes into what you do. But in the beginning, not knowing anything about photography, to finding these names and was great.
And then from Marks and Spencer to High Couture.
Well, I think before there was the very early stage of Depeche, which was kind of. I mean, when I first saw them playing in the East End, they were kind of suburban new romantics, kind of homemade DIY new romantics. And
no wonder I turned them down.
And then they went through, you know, lots of different phases very quickly. And then they got into their sort of, I don't know, around construction time again, I guess they got into their darker kind of look. And then I think when they got involved with Anton, he kind of honed that down to something that has been there. Has been going ever since, you know. Is that right, Anton?
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay.
Years later.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for just one more question. There's a chap with his hand patiently up over there.
This question is directed to Daniel and Anton. Firstly, Daniel, thank you, as somebody has already said, for the music and inspiration from the label and the artists and gigs, etc. Are there any artists or recording artists left that either of you would still like to work with, either alive or dead?
Ooh. Well, yeah. I mean, from a label point of view, we're always looking for new artists, and I mean, new artists. In terms of starting to work with somebody. Of course, New Order was a real exception. That was not a new artist when we started working with them. But it was, that was something that was a great. It's been a great, pleasure and honour to work with those guys because they're, incredible musicians and have an amazing history. But generally speaking, when we're looking to work with artists, they're unknown or pretty much unknown. And of course, I could cite, certain people who have been influences on Mute, on me. I mean, we're working with Can, for instance. We've been working with Can on their catalogue for the last 25 years. That's been an incredible experience. And there were other people from that era, like Noy, who we wanted to work with as well, which didn't work out for us. But thankfully somebody did it and did a good job on it. In terms of contemporary artists, it's more about new artists. And we are looking at one or two new signings. I don't really want to mention them here because I don't want to hex them. But and those are the kind of people I want to work with on Mute and on Nova Mute. Nova Mute for me is a really good route forward for exploring new kind of techno and new electronic music. But I can't really name any names of great artists that I would like to work with.
Yeah, for me, I think that I photographed so many people that are musicians that, in my life I wanted to broaden a bit more, to still with artists, but more outside of the music field. So I've done a lot of painters and directors and actors, so always in a sort of creative field or disciplines. And I try to make movies and do a lot of other stuff. So I can't say I really investigate a lot of new music because I feel that I don't want to relive, my youth. Although it might sound stupid, but you want to develop and to get another band of 18-year-olds. To photograph them, it feels odd because I come with a lot more baggage now than when I was 18 myself and photographed people who were my age, and it felt natural. And I feel other people should do that now. So I stick with the people that I know and try to develop that relationship, which I think is a beautiful thing, and is something I always fought for. That you became part of the inner circle, so you could photograph moments that other photographers were not allowed to photograph, and it's nice to see how things can develop. Say with Depeche Mode, with the album work and the stage and all that. So I concentrate on the few people that I still work with, and for the rest I do other things. So I'm not really. I can't really say I follow new music. I leave that to people here.
Thank you very much. Everyone, a round of applause for our panelists.